Ryan Walters is bringing some big-time changes.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in to another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen today, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5, get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers today. We're going to talk some basketball. We got a whole bunch of questions about it because that's been a brutal schedule for them, man. We're going to talk about just what the road ahead might look like after facing off with Oregon on Tuesday. That's going to be a big-time matchup. We're going to get into some of our favorite spring storylines to watch, which just kind of leads into the main topic of the show today. Just a reminder to all the everydayers out there, make sure you subscribe wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, because it does really help us out. We got so much more fun stuff coming throughout the offseason just like this. And speaking of spring practice, Lars, as always, you and I will be there, and we're going to have our eye out for a whole lot of different things. And I don't think anything is bigger right now than the acquisition of defensive coordinator Ryan Walters.
It's the one that offers the most intrigue because it's going to be different than what Belichick did. Obviously, just goes without saying on that one. But it's not going to be like, incorrect 180, night and day difference. You're not going to all of a sudden think, okay, now we're not going to go do man outside. We're not going to do certain things. And I mean, the roster that has been put together for Ryan Walters, I think fits perfectly with what he wants to do defensively. And so I think I'm going to be curious to see, what can some of those younger guys do in his scheme? How can he mirror it really quickly? Because when you go hire a former head coach, and again, 5-19 is what it is, but it's still a former head coach who is a highly touted defensive coordinator. You're expecting, Steve Belichick got him 26th in the country, 25th in the country, somewhere in that scoring defense. You're looking to stay in that same ballpark, especially given where UW was in 23.
Yeah, I like where you're going with that, because that's a huge part of this, where a lot of this, in my opinion, comes down to the personnel that was brought in around him as well, where that's one of the things that I don't think we're ever, it's never going to be a revisionist history thing that people go back and look at, where it's, Steve Belichick didn't necessarily have the bodies up front that were necessary to truly take the defense and just unlock it in the ways that, you and I especially expected that he would, which might not necessarily be the case this season. And so I like everything that you said there, because I thought about this very differently, where for me, I looked at what this is going to be schematically. We're going to see a lot more of the bare front, where it's five. It's not always going to be 5 down linemen. We're going to see 5 bodies on the line of scrimmage, 3 true defensive linemen, probably 2 defensive tackles, and maybe a bigger edge, whether it be Taitayu, Zach Durfee, just somebody in that mold as well. And then 2 stand-up outside linebackers, really most of the time, Isaiah Ward, Russell Davis, Jacob Lane, whoever you want to say in that department as well. And there's only going to be 1 linebacker on the field for a good majority of the time as well, which is, I think, the most significant change here, with 5 in the secondary for the most part, where nickel has kind of become the base just around football in general. But when I look at this and I say, I just look at the biggest thing that Ryan Walters is going to do differently, I just think that there's going to be a lot more man coverage. We saw a decent amount of it under Steve Belichick, but there's going to be a lot of trust in Takario Davis, in Ephesians Prasak, in whoever wins the job at nickel, where there's still going to be some help over the top for sure. But when I look at especially bringing in Takario Davis, which was certainly was always the plan once he entered the portal, no matter who the defensive coordinator was going to be, but he kind of unlocks that in a way that I don't think truly any other player that was in the transfer portal would have.
No, exactly. But that's also why you go out and get a player like Takario, because you can do the Richard Sherman effect and you can lock down one half of the field. That's no slight to a piece's price. Like maybe he can lock down the other, like he did opposite of Takario in 22 at Arizona. But, we didn't see as much this past season, and that's why, you're going in and bringing this front where it's 5 down linemen, like you said, and I think, honestly, that's why Buddha is the perfect fit, and Tariq Buddha Aluta is the perfect fit, a linebacker in that mold, because you can still have Yari come off the edge or kind of, spy him at times, or, give him a break if Manu does end up redshirting, which we both think he will. Scott Eklund had that report initially. And you just kind of look at all the pieces that they've added, and it makes sense. Like everything you're talking about makes sense. Right, Jakario outside, all the way to inside, all the pieces are there. Now, will it come together quickly and the injuries and things like that? So be it. But I am really intrigued to see, how maybe does some of the bigger safeties like an Alex McLaughlin or maybe a CJ Christian even do they also get some time at nickel and kind of use, because a lot of what you're seeing is bigger, more physical, longer cornerbacks at those nickel positions. And that way you're having like a pseudo hybrid linebacker safety, corner playing that position, because you need a guy that has size, not just, as good as Elijah Molden was, not everybody at that size is going to be able to pull it off. And so you're seeing bigger and faster and stronger guys at that position.
So I certainly agree with you there. I think that a lot of what happens in the secondary is going to be dependent on the defensive line, where we've seen some, I don't want to necessarily use the term significant, but some good, I truly think they're good enough acquisitions up front with Simone Pepa and Terry Thompson and Taito Uyunglele to not only improve against the run, but improve in rushing the passer, where Steve Belichick had one of the highest blitz rates in the country. And I think that that's something that we're going to see stay the same under Ryan Walters, where that's like the biggest similarity I see between those two guys. So I'm curious to see what that's going to look like. And the most important thing, where everything we just talked about is going to be critical. Takario, obviously, Ephesians Prysock kind of taking a step forward in as he moves over to the cornerback 2 role, where I don't want to say he's demoted, where it's just you brought in a truly elite talent in Takario Davis. So just having those guys play off each other again is going to be a big part of this, but you need to find a way to get after the quarterback, where as the season wore on, we saw it in the Sun Bowl, we saw it against Oregon, we saw it against Penn State, where when you can't make any impact against opposing quarterbacks, which we're going to see some pretty pass-friendly offenses coming to Washington this season and, going out on the road as well. If you can't find a way to get after the quarterback, none of it's going to matter. But I think that's one thing that we're really going to see change.
No, absolutely. And I think you kind of knew when this was the adjustment season, this is what Jedd had to learn in the Big Ten. And I think also why it's important that you went out and got a Big Ten familiar defensive coordinator. Like Belichick had no experience. And that's no slight to him in that regard. But you look at Ryan Walters, Illinois, and then Purdue, and even in the SEC at Missouri, where you're kind of aligned in that Big Ten SEC mold, he already knows what you need to do. And now it's just a matter of, okay, now I'm pairing the actual true philosophy that I want on a high end with the talent that we had returning, plus the guys you had in the portal. I'm just kind of curious to see how it ends up coming together, which will probably lead into the second segment, where there's a multitude of different options that you can roll with, where I know you said, you could have Zach Durfee as your defense end. You can also have him as a stand-up. Like there's multiple different things that you can do with this front. And I think what's interesting is we never really heard Jedd and Steve. I mean, we did, and obviously Steve's scheme pretty well, but we never heard Jedd kind of explain like, hey, well, I'm doing this on offense, so this is what I want my defense to do. It was kind of like, look, you know what? It's going to be what it is. We're going to lay the foundation. We're going to do these sorts of things. But you never truly heard him, at least, and for me, I never heard him say that.
No, you're right. But that's not so much of that's a completely different discussion, in my opinion. And it stems from one of Jedd's confidants and somebody he's worked very closely with, in Sean McVay, where Sean McVay was that way for a very, very long time, where when he first got the Rams job and he hired Wade Phillips, it was a very hands-off approach on the defensive side of the ball. He was like, this is what I do. This is what you do. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons he brought in Ryan Walters, is so that he can continue to do that, where it's, hey, this is somebody who has enough experience, has done it at a high enough level in the Big Ten as a defensive coordinator, especially, where obviously as a head coach, as you noted earlier, the success isn't there, but he has enough experience to just take command of that side of the ball. And he doesn't need to worry about something else, where Jedd can just say, I want to focus on my offense. I can continue to do that, which is going to be really interesting come spring ball, because, Lars, there's no bigger story than Damon Williams, which we'll get to right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keep every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or you're just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started $300 $100 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Lars, any spring conversation needs to start with Demond Williams, where it's almost beating a dead horse at this point, where I mean that with all due respect to DeBron, obviously. But it's just, this is, as we move into his first full season as a starter, I'm very curious to see what it's going to look like, because when they take the field for spring ball, that's not, even if, it was his first time truly acting as the number one quarterback, that's not going to be the first time he's done it, because he will have still taken first team reps throughout his freshman season and still worked with all these guys in the offseason. Like, they're still throwing, they're still doing all these different things and player run practices and different things like that. But as we kind of get into that organized setting in spring ball for the first time, whenever that comes around, and in March at some point, most likely, I'm just curious to see what that's going to look like for Demond in terms of taking the good majority of the first team reps with Shekai Kendall and just a couple other freshmen being in the room.
Yeah, well, I think that's why Jedd was so definitive, saying, throughout last season or this past season, that this was Demond's team. This is Demond's team. Demond is the face of the program. It was almost basically giving him a running start. And when you have a dual threat quarterback, it's even better. But I think it's more for his personality, because we both talked to him in the spring and in the fall camp. He was, you could tell he was poised and a good talker and things like that, but you could still see he was like not going to say anything that was anything beyond, good practice. Yeah. Good. It was very Belichickian in that way, where it's like, yeah, good job. Yeah, good. Yeah, this is really
right.
Good. And it's like, now, you need to see that confidence come out a little bit more. And I think we did, or we are, and we're going to in the spring. And I think Demond's style of how he carries himself and his mannerisms, I think, make it a perfect quarterback to go into this offseason with some experience, knowing how, Will Rogers gave him some tips as well, saying, hey, look, I was a quarterback in Mississippi State for all these years. Here's how I'd run things. Here's how I kind of would lead. And they seem to play off each other. And I think that will be, that experience and that relationship that he built with Will carry more weight in this offseason than it did during the season.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you there, because I like where you're going with that, because it kind of leads into what I want to talk about surrounding Demond, which is when I think about, it's something that you brought up throughout the season, is I just think about what this offense is going to look like with Demond at the helm for a full season. And it's just incorporating more movement where, it's be moving the pocket and doing different little things like that, because obviously that's one of his greatest strengths. So I just want to see what that looks like, in terms of the first couple of days. There's not going to be pads. It's going to be walkthroughs, different things like that. But I think we're going to see a whole lot more of that than we did at any point last year, where there's going to be more running of the read option. I think, you talked about seeing some 2-back sets. I think that's something we might see a little bit more of, where just as we continue to move forward through spring ball, watching install and just watching some of these different things go on, I think it's just going to look vastly different to what we saw in 2024. And I don't want to say it's going to give us a little more hope going into 2025, but it's just going to be a curious, it's not a departure either, just a curious new direction for this offense, with just Demond having the keys to the kingdom at this point.
It's an evolution more so than a departure. I think that's the word we're looking for, where we saw what Demond could do in a limited, snap count, a limited set last season. And as it started to get more, the only 2 times he had it was really the only game you can truly judge him was the Louisville game, because the Oregon game had no chance.
Absolutely.
Zero points. And probably, I know we say there was a non-zero chance. There was a 0 chance. Let's kind of be honest about that assessment. But with that being said, it was also a good trial by fire moment with him, at Penn State and Oregon, to where you now look at it and say, look, you faced the best that you're going to face. And now going into the season, you already have the confidence to say, you know what, I still managed to make some good plays, still managed to break one for 40 plus against Penn State. And so I don't think it's necessarily going to be like anything change. It's basically just going to be exactly what Jedd said, where we can call the entire playbook for Demond. You can call about 85% for Will. And if that's no slight to Will, it's just, you could have them standing next to each other on the sideline and be the nicest person in the world, and you could still make the judgment of, I see why it's 85 on 100. Like, it's slight to either one. It's just, it's what the skill set provides.
Yeah, exactly. It's a play style sort of thing. But Lars said, just to move off of Demond here, because there are a lot of other things that are going to look a lot different. What's another thing you're going to be watching for this spring?
So I still don't know where I believe, but it's a segue off of Demond to the second most important position, arguably, and that's left tackle. Like, who is going? Sure. What is your offensive line going to look like? Where I know the Troy offensive lineman that you were looking at ended up going to. Where did he go? He ended up. No, but you saw he ended up
totally blanking. I know. Yeah.
And so he's off the board. So my point is, we still want to see one more offensive line addition. Maybe we will. Maybe it'll be in the spring period. Who's going to end up? Is it Max at left tackle or is it Carver Willis? Does Drew Azzopardi stay at right tackle? Because again, I'm warming up very, very slowly, might I add, to your concept of kicking him inside the right guard, which it's not a bad one. I don't know how well I don't know what's worse, kicking him to left tackle or kicking him to inside of right guard. I think right guard is probably better for him, but
right guard is much better.
Right, obviously. but with that being said, you brought in Carver as a right tackle. Do you just kick him over keep him at his right tackle position and empower Max? Because at some point you want to get the best out of Max you can.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said it that way, because you did bring in Carver, who's played right tackle, and he has said that the plan right now is for him to play left tackle. But these are different things you can figure out where, you tried Drew also out at left tackle. And I don't mean that putting Drew at right guard is, much better in terms of his skill set, but it's just in terms of you have a guy in Maximus McCree who showed he could be a sturdy, solid left tackle. Was he like a world beater out there? No, he certainly wasn't. But that's not that's not what you need. You just need somebody who can be steady and be solid and have a group of 5 guys that is going to be just that solid, steady, average to above average, where having an elite offensive line would be fantastic, but we don't have that expectation for this group as of right now, where if you bring in Carver and he wins the job at left tackle, great, fine. That's okay. That's exactly what you brought him in to do. You prioritized him because you wanted a premier caliber, just bookend tackle. And if Jedd Fisch beats out Maximus McCree for that spot, great, fine. That's what you want. You want the best talent to win out no matter just at any spot. But when I look at the possibility of moving Jedd Fisch off of right tackle and kicking him inside to right guard, I think it's just more about that. And it's just saying, give him a little more help with an experienced tackle on the outside in Carver Willis, and next to a center with plenty of experience as well, Landon Hatchett. So I just think that that's something to consider in terms of that discussion, where I agree when it comes to the offensive line. You just want to see the best players win out, no matter, what they came in as, whatever it might look like. You just want to see the best 5 players there, especially, you referenced the Oregon game. We saw what happened there. So it's something that it's really curious, because there are other names to think about in this discussion, right? Where you and I have discussed Paki Finau ad nauseum, because he's somebody who could take that step forward when you talk to people around the program. It could be, a Justin Hilkema or David Boyajian. It could be a Zach Henning that steps up and win a spot. It could be Michael Watkins. Like, there are plenty of names to discuss. Just the curious part of this is, because Geirean Hatchett, I can't leave him out of this discussion as well. You look at all these names and you say, okay, there's a lot of guys who certainly could make an impact. The question is going to be, which ones are going to do it?
And how quickly, because a lot of those guys that you just mentioned are still freshmen, redshirt freshmen, redshirt sophomores that haven't had multiple starts under their belt. The only one would be Landon. And, Michael Watkins didn't even end up playing. But you like the projectability. And so it's a matter of, again, this spring has to be an improvement from last spring. You can't get any lower last spring than where you were, where you had like 6 offensive linemen at one point, or at least it felt like that.
Right.
But the point being, you're in a better position now, so maximize it. And then, the key is also the interesting thing is going to be when they start spring ball, and does it end up impacting with the portal? Because if some of these guys end up getting reps day 2, day 3, day 4, and then it's like, oh, wait, okay, I'm getting these reps because I'm not going to be a player this year. Okay, well, I'm going to go in the portal. And now it's like, well, wait, you could have used those reps on like a Hilkema or somebody else. Where
sure.
Hey, we came from Arizona, want to keep him in the process, have him be our future left tackle. You're going to need to get those reps in there.
But that's that. So that kind of leads into the last thing that I wanted to talk about, which is, and it's something we talked about on the Monday show as well. Guys are still going to leave. That's still something that is going to happen at some point in time over the course of the spring during that portal window, because you are over the 85-man scholarship limit. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing for some of these guys to get some of those reps, because like that's just all all of what spring ball is. It's getting in as many reps as you can and letting the cream rise to the top, which is something that Jedd talks about every chance he gets. So if that's the case, and whatever example you want to give in terms of getting reps at, again, whatever position, because it doesn't necessarily matter. If so, one of those guys starts on let's just say he starts out with the first team and somebody else beats him out for his spot and he enters the transfer portal. Okay. Like somebody was going to have to leave probably that position too, where there might be one from the offensive line, no matter what the case is. So it's just all right, we like this guy. He clearly beat out the other one. So it's almost just no harm, no foul at that point, in my opinion. But it's going to be really curious because there's going to be so much time to talk about all the different movement we might see over the course of the spring. But Lars, we got to switch gears to basketball because they're almost out of the woods in terms of this gauntlet of a schedule, which we'll get to right after a message from our good friends over at Prize Picks. This message is brought to you by Prize Picks, the place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions in winnings. Prize Picks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports, whether it's the playoffs or regular season. Prize Picks has made it easier than ever to win big while enjoying all the football action. Now it's playoff time. There's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks. Here's how it works. You simply pick more or less on at least 2 players, and if your picks hit, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. Yeah, that's right, 1,000 times your money just by making a few simple picks. For me, I'm all about the hot takes this season. This week on Prize Picks, I'm looking at Josh Allen for more than 250 passing yards, and I'm looking at Saquon Barkley for more than 70 rushing yards. It's fun to predict and easy to play. Plus, with Prize Picks Flex Play, you can still double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. And with the app, you get your winnings fast, sometimes in as little as 15 minutes. Ready to run your game this football season? Download the app today and use code LOCKDOWNCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 just for playing. Don't wait. Take your game to the next level with Prize Picks. Prize Picks, run your game. Lars, as you and I talked about a little bit before this true gauntlet got underway, that was going to be unheard of. Danny Sprinkle said, yeah, this is something I don't know if this program's ever seen. He doubled down on that during his Saturday press conference where he said, yeah, we had some of our staffers go back and look at that and said, this is far and away the hardest month that Washington basketball as a program has ever faced in terms of the Ken Palm rankings, where it's in terms of the coaches poll, 7 straight ranked opponents. Oregon will make number 6. Now, Washington has only won one of these games, which is a bummer, and there's a whole bunch of reasons that we're going to get into about why that has happened. But as I look at this game against Oregon, I don't want to say it's a must-have, but just in terms of the momentum, this would be a really, really nice one to just get this team back on track.
And the only real way that I see that happening is if a former Oregon basketball player makes his return to the court.
Yeah, that's
talking about one Franck Kepnang. Like that has been the enigma of this entire, and it's not necessarily Frank's fault. Like I want to make that very clear. Where it's good kid, and again with a knee injury, multiple knee injuries, especially after last season. Like I get it, being sensitive and wanting to make sure you're 100%. But you don't have any presence in the front court like Frank. And Great can only do so much. We saw him have another 28-point game against
Purdue. He was stellar.
Right. And so, for everything that we say, hey, Frank, Great is not doing great, not living up to his expectations, he needs help. And Wilhelm's been serviceable, but you don't have that true 6'11", almost 7-footer at the 5 to help Great, in the paint, because otherwise he's basically just getting used and abused on defense.
I was going to say, because it's not just on offense, where Frank is he's never been just a true elite offensive threat, where he absolutely can be whenever he gets the ball down low, but that's just never been a big part of his game, where it's energy and it's defense, and he's fantastic at both of those things. But when we've only seen him for 2 games this season, it's got to the point where you can tell that Danny is very frustrated by whatever's going on there. Because remember, I asked him in, I think it was late December, about his timeline. He said, yeah, we're kind of expecting him around this time. Asked him again in January. And it was, well, we were hoping to have him back a few weeks ago. And now he's gone on KJR and talked about it in his press conference saying, hey, we need him back. And he was cleared to play. We've been expecting him to come back. And you and I saw him working out before the Purdue game. And it seems like a return is getting closer. But it still seems like there's a bit of a mystery around it. And whenever he does come back, that adds so much in terms of the rebounding, in terms of the defense, in terms of taking pressure off of Great on both ends of the floor, as you said, which is such a critical part of all of this. And the thing that makes it the most frustrating, I think, is there have been not only but there have been so many key situations where you could have used a guy like that, but it's shown up in key moments where I think about having a guy like that against Illinois and how that game turned out. Having a guy like that maybe stops one of those that early run at Michigan State and the way that game went. Having him where, I mean, I don't think they would have won that game against Michigan with just those bigs are tremendous over there. But all of a sudden it's a little more of a competition when you have a guy like Franck Kepnang in the game. So moving forward, you'd really hope to see him back soon and that he's able to play. Obviously, it's extremely unfortunate to have had 3 knee surgeries in 3 years. We don't want to discount that. But if the doctors have said he's ready to play, Danny was very confident when we first asked him about it after he missed a game or 2 in early November. And then it just seems to have not improved from there, which is really unfortunate because he is such a big part of this team.
But in a way, it reminds me a lot, because as you were saying that, all great points, it made me think back to when I asked Hopkins last year, basically around the same time, December, January, saying, because he got hurt against Seattle U in mid-December last year.
Yep.
And ended up, I think it was by mid-January, I want to say, Hopkins was like, yeah, no, he's ready to go. Like, he's glad to go. He's good to go. And then just absolutely disappeared. Like, no, it almost, some people, I remember some people thought that Hopkins was throwing Kepnang under the bus. It wasn't, and it's the same thing that Danny's doing. They're not throwing him under the bus. If it's one thing if the doctors are not clearing him, or if the coaching staff is pressuring him. He seems like he's in good spirits and moving well in the pregame. And when we saw the workouts that he was doing, there's been no breaks. There's been no obvious in terms of, hey, like, this is what is the reason. And so you think about it, and just like, is it a mental thing? Which again, as athletes, it's like, you get it. There's a certain mental hurdle that you have to clear. But the only way to clear it is to play. Even if it's just 10 minutes, even if you just play 10 minutes, 5 minutes per half, that's 10 more minutes than you haven't had all season. And that might, like you said, stop that second half run against Purdue where they go on a couple of runs and keep you in games. And also it allows you to stretch the floor, because Great is such a versatile ball handler. If you have Franck at the 5, you really kind of have a 3+1+1 versus a 3+2, because you have a long 6'11" center. Now the spacing becomes a little easier. Now your guards are able to spread out. Now Great is able to be more off ball and do things, and it just opens everything up. And it's not solely on Franck. When you look at the depth, Casey Ibekwe has been really slow to come along. He's gotten on some games in Big Ten play. We didn't see him early on in the season. Then Chris Conway is obviously out for the season, so nothing you can do there. So now you're looking at Christian King and Wilhelm Breitenbach as your only other 2, 4, or 5 potential guys. And
right.
Christian King ain't playing the 5. I love Christian King, but he ain't playing the 5.
So we can dive into that a little bit, because I also want to make sure we mentioned that DJ Davis was unable to suit up in the last couple of games, and obviously that's a missing piece as well. But we've seen Washington shoot the ball really well in the last couple of games, which has been nice to see. But we've mentioned, in terms of Casey Ibekwe, that's the one that's a little confusing, where Danny has said, hey, I don't really like the way I just don't like the matchups that he brings against teams that like to really play from the perimeter and stretch the floor really well. Purdue being one of those teams where they shot the ball really, really well all season long and just really had a down first half. But it's an interesting thing there, where Wilhelm is certainly much better in that regard, which is why you've seen more of him, more of Christian King. But as much as we can harp on the defensive struggles, there have been so many points in, like, the second half against Purdue is a fantastic example. You go into the locker room up 8, and obviously Danny, talked about it after the game, saying, yeah, they just made more adjustments. They played harder. They did a whole bunch of different things, but it happens in every game, which has been one of the really frustrating things that we've seen so far this year, is they just go cold, where the big glaring example, and, just to tie it into the game the upcoming game at Oregon, you can't have those cold streaks where you don't hit a shot from the field for 10 minutes. Like, in the first 10 minutes of the game need be like any 10 minutes, obviously. But the same thing, you come out of the locker room against Purdue and you just let them right back into the game in 4 minutes. By the first media break, like that game was tied. I think they had the lead by that point. So it's the little things like that that need to be improved where Danny has said, I need to see these guys play harder. I need to see them do this. I need to see them do that. And despite the way the season has looked so far, it's something that gives me a lot of hope regarding Danny Sprinkle moving forward and building this program the way he does, because he's not one to mince words. He's not one to say, oh, I'm proud of this, I'm proud of that, but, and we'll get him next time. We were just cold today. He is consistently, hey, these guys need to be tougher. They need to be more engaged. They need to be trying harder. Like he's very quick to call all that sort of stuff out.
And in an interesting way, it kind of we'll bring this all full circle. When we had him on in June or July over the summer, when I kind of brought up to Danny, hey, you mentioned in May this was going to be a 2 or 3 year build. Like it wasn't, it's not easy to catch lightning in a bottle. And despite what his history and record has shown, it's still not. And you have good character guys, but I think even Danny said in his press conference where it's like, look, we're not the team that I had at Montana State. We don't have that toughness, and so he's bringing in that elite recruiting class in 25 and saying, hey, look, like I got the first wave with Zoom plus Diamande next year. And you look at all the guys that he's adding for the long term, but it's like, this was again, almost like Fisch. It's a foundational year. You're laying the foundation. And that's why Danny's being so hard, is because like, look, I'm not going to change my coaching style. I need my players to level up their, abilities and, handling of my coaching. And I will say, like, I think Lewis Courtwright and a couple others have even said, like, you want to play for Coach Sprinkle. You want someone to be on you. You want someone to, get the best out of you. You don't want someone who's just letting you chill on the bench and not even trying to get the best out of you. So they got the right coach in place. You got to get the right players to pair with him.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all everydayers tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you don't miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comments section. And if you're audio only, please leave us 5-star reviews. It does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Wednesday.